Hey crafty people, I'm Sarah, also known as Craft Nerd, because I'm a nerd who loves to craft. Over the years I've dabbled in most types of crafting, although for the past decade or so I've been doing primarily card making and mixed media art. I've recently embarked on a junk journaling journey that I hope you'll join me on. So today we're going to create some cards using heat embossed backgrounds, and I'm going to show you three different techniques for creating backgrounds with heat embossing. One thing to remember if you are new to heat embossing is what you're going to need is an embossing powder. I've got some of the Distress Embossing Glaze, which is a clear embossing, like a translucent colored embossing powder. And I also have clear embossing powder, which I put in a tub just to make it easier to use. So it's in here. You can use color embossing powder. I've got a whole bunch I've got red embossing powder, and this is opaque, so it would create a red background. Whatever embossing powder you have, you can use for these techniques. And so for the techniques I'm going to show you, for one, I'm using colored embossing powders. And for the other two, I'm going to be using clear embossing powder. Now, another thing you need to keep in mind if you're new to embossing is that the embossing powder needs something to adhere to on the paper. It's not going to stay on the paper on its own. So one of the most common ways of heat embossing is to use a clear ink or an embossing ink. I use Versamark, so it's a clear ink pad. If stamped on dark paper, will leave like a watermark impression, but if stamped on white paper, you won't really see your stamping at all once it dries. I know Distress Ink has an embossing ink. Another option is to use a clear embossing dauber. So that's another way you can apply a clear ink to your paper to then apply your embossing powders to. And then there are also embossing pens. I've got the Distress embossing pen, so you can actually write and add embossing powder to it. You can also use texture paste, like a translucent texture paste, or even matte medium. If you're going to use something like the texture paste or the matte medium, you need to apply it, add your embossing powder, and then let it dry before you heat emboss. And in fact, the first one we're going to use texture paste and a stencil to create our background. And we're going to do that one first because it's going to need to spend a little time drying before we heat emboss it. If you're using an ink, you stamp, you add your embossing powder, shake off the excess, and you can heat emboss immediately. You don't have to wait. The drying time is not necessary. The problem is if you're using a paste or a glue, it will bubble up if you heat it before it is dry. So we're going to start with this version. So I've gone ahead and grabbed my piece of cardstock. It's cut down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 because that's my standard card base size. I've pulled out my Wendy Vecchi Make Art Station so I can use my magnets to hold things in place. And I want to use this Tim Holtz Stampers Anonymous stencil, and it's THMS029. And this is a technique I've seen Tim Holtz demonstrate a couple times on his lives. Now, this stencil is one of the mini stencils, so it's not going to cover my full card base, but I'm okay with that. I think we're just going to go ahead and do one section and either trim this down or kind of work around it for our finished piece. I haven't fully decided yet how I'm going to use this. So we're just going to get started. And so for this one, I am using Distress Translucent texture paste, and I'm just going to apply a thin coat over the whole piece. If I can get the jar open. There we go. Now, something you can do before you start applying, it's a little too late now for me because I forgot to do this, is you can brush your paper with a anti-static tool, which is usually just like a porous bag with powder in it. If you don't have one of those, you can use used dryer sheets, will also help with cutting down static. on your paper. And the reason I'm suggesting this is it helps later on when you put the embossing powders on to keep it from sticking in the places you don't want it to stick. So I'm just doing a thin, even coat of my texture paste. So now that we have put our thin coat on, I'm just gonna carefully peel up my stencil. And I've got a dish off to the side with some water in it. I'm gonna toss my stencil in that because you don't want the texture paste drying on the stencil, so the water will keep it from drying. Otherwise, if it's in any of the openings, you'll end up ruining your stencil. Now, what I am gonna do for this guy is I am going to I grabbed a bunch of my Distress Emboss glazes, and I'm gonna grab a little scoop I have, and we're gonna start with a little vintage photo. And I'm just using the scoop because it'll be easier for me to get the powder out. But we're gonna kind of just apply it. I think I'm gonna put it in the lid because I do want to use my fingers to kind of pinch so that I can just add a little bit. On my pine cones. And I think I need to go turn my ceiling fan off. I'll be right back. All right, I'm gonna use my little scoop and just put a little on and do this. Usually when Tim Holtz does it, he pinches and puts it on, but I quite frankly don't like getting embossing powder up under my fingernails. So I've put a little vintage photo. I've also got some Walnut Stain, so just to add a little variety. Oop, and I missed a pine cone. Now we've got some drying time, but I wouldn't suggest taking all the time in the world kind of thing. So work deliberately, but you don't have to rush to get this done. I'm gonna add a little bit of ground espresso to our Then for our berries, I've got Fired Brick and Crackling Campfire. Start with the Crackling Campfire, I think. Now, if you don't have a scoop like this, you can also take a soft, dry brush and dip it in the powder and tap it off. I'm having a little less control with the brush, so I think I'm going to go back to my scoop. The scoop also applies a little bit more faster. Now I'm going to grab some Fired Brick. Those done. And now I'm going to do, oh, I missed some in the middle. Hold on. Let's get a little red on those. Or more red on those. And now I've got a variety of greens. I've got Rustic Wilderness, Peeled Paint, Crushed Olive, and Bundled Sage. And we're just going to go in and add green. A little bit of Bundled Sage. and a teeny tiny bit of crushed olive. It's just to give a little variety to our greens. If you don't have all these colors, you do not need to do a ton of colors. You could just do red, a brown, and a green. Now, what we're gonna do is take a scrap piece of paper. I'm just gonna flip it and tap off. And then what I can do is go back, if there's any spots that I feel like is missing embossing powder, I can go back in and add some more. This I'm gonna stick into a separate container. If you've watched any of the Tim Holtz vlogs where he's demoed this technique, you know he refers to this as the party mix. So you can just use this for something where you just want to get some embossing glaze on and it doesn't really matter to you what color it is, kind of thing. All right, let's go back in and decide who needs some more and where I need to put more. All right, some of the berry needs a little bit more. So let's grab a little fire brick. We'll go in over our berries again. Definitely need some more greens and a little bit more brown. All right. Now I went ahead and dumped the red right away this time around because I had dumped a bunch on this piece instead of on here. And because we've already done a layer, most of the piece is already covered. So it's less likely that I'd end up getting red in spots I didn't want red. Whereas if I did it when everything was still mostly uncovered, I'd have a lot of red leaves, if that makes any sense. All right, I'm coming in with some Rustic Wilderness. And maybe some more peeled paint, and then there's some spots on the pine cones that need a little bit more, I think. All right, I think we're pretty well covered. Now, I'm noticing some spots where I've got embossing powder not on the stencils bits. So you can always come back in with a paintbrush and just use a dry, soft paintbrush to basically loosen it up and then tap it off, and you should be able to get rid of the stuff in spots you don't want embossing powder. So I am now going to set this piece aside and let the texture paste dry completely before I come back and emboss the piece. For our next card, you're going to need a piece of dark colored cardstock, whatever color you want. I picked this nice dark red cardstock. Now, normally I'd cut this all the way down to 5.5 by 4 1/4, but I want to use my Misty to help with my stamping. And my stamp is a full coverage background stamp, so I won't be able to use my magnets if I cut it down to 4 1/4 by 5.5, whereas I can if I leave it and then trim it out afterwards. And I am using, this is a Rubbernecker stamp, and it's 'Twas the Night. And it's basically the entire poem of 'Twas the Night Before Christmas written out. And it's 653. I don't know if this is still available. I bought this a couple of years back, and I think this is the first time that I'm going to actually use it. I have a horrible habit of doing that. So I am gonna line it up so that I am, yeah, it's about 4 1/4. So I'm gonna just stick that there and use my magnets to keep this down. And basically what we're gonna create when we're done with this is a tone-on-tone textured background. So we're gonna stamp with our clear embossing ink, whatever clear embossing ink you have. If you've just got a dauber, you can apply the ink to your stamp using the dauber. Just get ink all over the place. Use my Misty, and I probably should have taken the foam piece out of the bottom because this is a foam backed stamp. Yeah, I did not get a very good impression in the middle, so I'm glad I used my Misty. Now again, I want to do this fairly quickly because I need to add my embossing powder before the ink dries completely. So now I'm focusing on ink stamping in the center to hopefully get a good impression of the center of the stamp this time. Yep, it looks good. Now, when you stamp with clear ink, you can see it. It's on there. I'm going to set this aside and pull over my clear embossing powder. Grab my scoop and just start applying my clear embossing powder. Probably should grab a spoon because that would be bigger. But yeah, the advantage of putting my clear embossing powder in a big container like this is I can just do it over top and tap the excess right back in. Don't necessarily have room to do this with all of the colored embossing powders I have, but for something like clear embossing powder, where it tends to be my go-to when I'm embossing, please ignore my barking dog, it makes it really easy to use to have it in a bigger container than those teeny tiny jars. Now I am going to just heat emboss this with my heat gun. And it works better if you lift it up off your work surface because then the heat can circulate around and underneath and it'll just heat faster. Helps if I plug it in. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind is once you notice it start changing colors, you want to move it around. And let's see if you can see, there are some spots that don't know that they're fully embossed. So you'll notice there are a few spots that aren't shiny. Those did not get fully embossed, so I'm going to go back and emboss them. Just be careful because you don't want to over emboss because that will melt the embossing powder into the paper and you will lose the shiny. So if you have some spots that when you tilt it, it doesn't look shiny, look closely at them. And if it looks like there's still unmelted embossing powder there, hit it again with your heat gun. Till you get the shine. And once you get that shine, stop heating. So there's our background. Just give it a second. Now don't touch the embossing powder that you've melted. Give it a second to just cool off because otherwise what you'll end up doing is smearing it. So I don't know how well you can see. You've got like the lovely shiny background. So that's our second background. And so what I'll just do is then trim this down to the right size for my card when I'm ready to turn it into a card. Now for the last one, we're going to do an emboss resist technique. Now I cut this piece down to 5.5 by 5. And I just made a little tick mark where 4 1/4 is, just so that I have something I can pick up the piece with and it'll make life a little easier. And I'm pulling out my Misty again, just because I like the reassurance of being able to restamp in the same spot I get with using my Misty. Now for this one, I've grabbed a bunch of snowflake stamps and they are by Inkadinkado. Oh yep, they're all by Inkadinkado that I'm planning on using. So we're gonna create a winter wonderland-y kind of background. And we're going to start with stamping some snowflakes. And we're going to have a lot of back and forth here because I don't want to worry about whether or not I can get everything stamped and my ink all dry. Before I do that, let me grab a used dryer sheet, and I'm just going to do this real quick over top of the piece. It's just going to reduce any static. Oh, and I forgot to say, this piece is Canson XL watercolor paper. And it's the smoother side. Not that this one has a lot of texture to it, but one side has a little bit more texture than the other. So I'm using the smooth side. And I'm going to just start by stamping my first image. Don't think that got much ink on there. Let's try that again. Now, it's probably not going to show up very well on camera, but when you stamp with an embossing ink, there's a little bit of shine to where the stamp is that you may or may not be able to, the camera may or may not be picking it up. But I'm just going to turn around and put the powder on now. And I'm going to live life dangerously and leave the lid off the embossing powder so that it's faster for me to switch between inking and putting the powder on. I think I'm going to stamp this one more time. Now, as I said, these are Inkadinkado stamps, and they're really old stamps. Just use whatever you have in your stamp stash for this. Now that we are done stamping and applying our embossing powder, I'm just going to heat emboss this. Alright, so I don't know if our snowflakes are even showing up on screen. I'll tilt a little, you can see those are the embossed guys. What I'm going to do now is I am going to grab my splatter box, because what we're going to do now is we are going to ink our background. And you can do this in a variety of ways. You can do brushes and do just brush on, you know, like these guys. I could just brush on color, but I think I want to play with my my distress sprays and mica sprays. So I've grabbed all of my blue sprays. So we're just gonna play around a little bit. So I've got out on my desk Distress Oxide Salvaged Patina, Distress Oxide Salty Ocean, Distress Oxide Peacock Feathers, and Mermaid Lagoon. I have Distress in Salvaged Patina, Uncharted Mariner, which I think at this point I'm going to set that aside because I think it's going to be too dark. I'm not going to be happy with that. And some Peacock Feathers. And then I've got the Mica stains in Shiny Bauble and Snow Flurries. I'm going to start by spritzing my paper a little bit. And this is why I went with a watercolor cardstock. And I'm going to add a little regular Salvaged Patina. A hint of Peacock Feathers. And then we're going to do our Oxide sprays. And it's curling up. To make my life a little easier, I'm going to spritz some water on the back, which will uncurl it. Watch the magic as it's flattening out. So I've got some Salvaged Patina Oxide spray. Mermaid Lagoon. Woo. That one was Salty Ocean. And now some Peacock Feather. Now I'm going to grab my mister and just get everybody wet and moving around a little bit, hopefully. Let's see. I'm going to come in, and I've got some spots over here I think need a little bit more. There's that was Salvaged Patina Distressed Ink, and that's getting everybody moving a little bit better. And I am going to take another piece of cardstock. Now, I'm not going to use my heat tool because I don't want to worry about reheating my embossed spots for this. So I'm not going to use that to dry. I'll use another piece of paper. And then I grab one more. It's always a good idea when playing with distress inks to have some spare papers around that you can use for cleanup. I feel like I need some more ink down here. Let's do a little Salvaged Patina and Distress Oxide and a little Mermaid Lagoon. Again, I'm going to grab my cleanup papers. It's also helping mix the ink on this page. All right, now I'm going to pull in my sparkle. So I'm just going to use a little bit of the Shiny Bauble. Okay, I think I'm clogged. So what I'm going to do is going to just pull this out and just kind of so we get bits of shine. And then I'm going to do the same with the Snow Flurries. And I'm going to go wild and crazy and a little Hocus Pocus and just add a little bit of purple to this. Just a little bit. And I do want to dilute my purple a little bit, so I'm going to spritz that around, get everybody moving a little bit. This piece is very wet. It's going to need a minute to dry. Grab my cleanup piece. I'm gonna need to set the sucker aside to dry. It is like sloppy wet right now. So I'm gonna do that, and when it's dry, we will come back and I will show you what it looks like and the last little step when doing Embossed Resist. And I'm gonna clean up all of this lovely ink with my scrap pieces of paper. Now that it's completely dry, we are gonna heat emboss it. All right, so there you go. That's what the piece looks like once it's all dried and heat embossed. I definitely missed a few spots, but that's okay. I still like how this turned out. And I am gonna trim it down probably to the size that the stencil was and use it on a card. But I haven't figured out just what I'm doing yet, so I'll be back with that. All right, so this piece is all dry, and there's just one thing I like to do after it's all dry, just to make sure, like with the sprays, it seemed to resist really well, but just in case there's still ink on the embossed parts, just take a little damp towel and go over it to make sure you don't have any ink left on the white spots, because that's the whole point of the Embossed Resist, is that where you have your embossed pieces, it resists the ink. So you just go over it lightly with a damp towel to make sure you've wiped off all the ink from your embossed areas. And so there you go. The white from underneath is showing through because we used a clear embossing powder. You could do it with colored embossing powders. I could have done this with like a silver and had the snowflakes in silver. That's always an option as well. But I just really like the white of the snowflakes. So there's that piece, and I'm still working out what I want to do for finishing this card off. So I'll be back with that in a bit. All right, so I've gone and done some prep work to finish off our embossed background cards. So for the first one, I have Walter. He is a Tim Holtz, Sizzix, and Simon Says Stamp exclusive die. And he's available in December of 2023. And it's a limited edition, so I'm not entirely sure if right at this moment that this video goes up, if he's still available. But if he is, you can get him only at Simon Says Stamp, and he is free with the purchase of like $25 of Tim Holtz products. So I have no affiliation with any of those organizations, but I just thought I'd let you know because he is too stinking cute. So yes, I got me a Walter this month. So he's going to be the main character on our background. I also used my Lawn Fawn wavy stitched hillsides die to create a ground for him. And it's a little bit bigger than I want, so we're going to attach it and then trim it off. And then I had to give him a little house. So this die is by Lawn Fawn as well, and it's their acorn house die. I just left the acorn topper bit off. The door is actually from an Impression Obsession house die. And what I did to create like the igloo blocks is I took the Tim Holtz bricked stencil, which is THS038, inked it, spritzed it with water, and then pressed it down so that I'd get just the line impressions. I didn't want to ink the bricks because I wanted the bricks to be white. And then the wreath is Tim Holtz Sizzix die. It's Christmas Minis 665567. I'm not sure if this is retired or not. So you may or may not be able to find it. Like I got it, I think from eBay. So that's what I used to create the wreath. And again, I used some more of my leftover, and I die cut it from some inked pieces left over from a previous project using Distress ink and Mica stains, and the same for the accessories on Walter over here. So we're just gonna go ahead and grab some glue and assemble this guy. So for the snowy drift, what I'm going to do is apply glue at the top edge and then the bottom along here, and I think I just added way more glue, glued further over here than I needed to. And then I'm just going to add a little bit over here, and that should be enough to keep it down. So I'm just going to do that, flip it over. Oh yeah, I got glue everywhere. Grab a paper towel. And then just grab some scissors and trim off the excess. And then we're just gonna add the egg glue and then Walter. And I had planned on having this video posted sooner than it's going to be going up, but I had a bit of drama last night. I went out to bring up my garbage pails from the curb. I saw some movement to the side, and it was, you know, maybe 6 in the evening, which it had gotten dark by then, and I realized the movement was a sick and/or injured squirrel. And my mother used to do wildlife rehab, so there was no way I could just leave the squirrel to his fate. So after some texts and phone calls to the people my mother used to volunteer to do wildlife rehab with, I ended up taking it to one of the volunteers' house so that she could take care of him. And so I've yet to hear any word on how he survived the night, but I did my part. So we had a bit of a squirrel rescue last night. I'm gonna attach this to my card base. And I will warn you, if you see a sick or injured squirrel and want to assist it, be very, very cautious, because I've been bitten by a squirrel before that my mother had that I was helping take care of, and those suckers can bite right through a fingernail. If you think about it, they have the ability to open nuts with their jaws, so keep that in mind and be very cautious. All right, so there's that card. Now for the next one, I've got the panel we embossed with embossing glaze and texture paste through a stencil, and I really love how this came out, so I don't really want to do a whole heck of a lot. So what I did was, this is a new embossing folder I got from Simon Says Stamp, and I don't know the name of it, and I'm not sure where I put it, so getting it to tell you will take a minute. I will put it down in the description box down below. And it's a 3D embossing folder, and I just went over the raised bits with a little of the Sizzix luster wax in ivory just to make it pop a little. So the plan is that will be the base of our card, and then I used the decal edge blade for my paper trimmer to cut out a little mat for it, and we're going to stick this on here. And then I think it just needs a little bit of ribbon right over here. So I grabbed some ribbon out of my stash, and I think I may go with the thinner ribbon and do kind of like a little ribbon here and then a bow. I think that's what we're gonna do. So let's start by adding this to that piece. Cut it a little shorter than I would have liked, but I just wanted a little bit of a border around it. That'll go right there. And I think I want to do, let's just see how we like this as our layout. And then I'll do a bow right there. Yep, I think I like that. All right, so what we're gonna do is trim off a little bit of the sprayed bit at the edge. And I'm gonna grab my Fabri-Tac for this instead of my art glitter glue, because it'll just grip faster. I'm gonna flip this over, doing it here, so do a little there, and a little there. And this, like so, and just pull it around. Oop. Trim it off. Do that. And you don't need to glue the whole thing down. Once we put the other piece on, that will help hold it down. And once this piece is attached to here, that'll also help hold it down. So if I'm doing a strip of ribbon on a card, I usually just tack a little bit on the back side of the card base, because that works to keep it down and I don't have to use a ton of glue and all of that. So let's go ahead and put this on. And I'm going to attach it to a card base like so. Now, art glitter glue will glue fabric and ribbon. It just doesn't grab as quickly as the Fabri-Tac. So it's fine for going over where the ribbon is on the back. And now we're going to do a bow. So I have a Bow Easy, which helps you in creating bows. And so you take the tool, you decide this is going to be the loop size. So it's got a variety of different loop size options. So you come behind, wrap it around, go over, and so you can do this with like a fork. If you've got a plastic fork, you can take some of the tines out to create your own. That then goes over and behind, and and then on the back side, you go like that. I can never remember there's like a special way to knot it that works out. That seems to have worked out well. So there is our bow. I'm just going to fiddle with the knot a little bit and stick it over here and decide if I like that. I think that's going to work. So I'm just going to trim my tails. And glue that on there with some Fabri-Tac. I'm just going to hold that. Actually, I think I may add a little bit more glue just to make sure it stays down. And just hold that for a minute. And then we'll go on to the third and final card. All right, so I decided the bow was a little too big, so I did a new bow and changed that out. Now for our last one, I went ahead and stamped. These are Tim Holtz Stampers Anonymous Forest Floor CMS 422, and I stamped them with Versamark and embossed with my Distress Embossing Glaze, and then I went back in and colored with a little bit of a Distress ink. And I am going to put a bow at the top. Let's go ahead and attach this to the base. And then I'm going to just add my branches. So this is a single-sided ribbon. So to make sure both of my loops are showing the right side of the ribbon, when I start at the back, I start with the wrong side facing up so that when I loop around, I've got the right side showing up. Then in the center part, you need to twist so that you keep having the correct side showing up so that it shows up like that. And then you can wrap that around to create your center. And then tie in the back. And there we go. And I've got a little bit more tail than I want. So let's trim those down. And I'm just lining them up together so that I can get them kind of the same length. Let's see, did I trim enough off? Now, I definitely want this a lot shorter. I think we're gonna trim our tails off more like here. So that it's more like that, and that is too short. That's the one problem with this. You can't really adjust the bow, the loop length, once you tie the knot. So we're gonna do this one more time. There we go, I like that. I'm just finagling the pieces a little bit. Somehow I managed to get this so that the knots come into the front. Right, so I retied the bow one more time off screen, trying to get it to sit how I want it, and it's still not being difficult. But I think there we go. That's gonna go up there. Let me grab my Fabri-Tac. All right, so that's just gonna need a little bit to dry. And so there's 1, 2, 3 cards made using embossed backgrounds. Let's try and get everybody on screen here. So there are our 3 cards made using embossed backgrounds. Now for these 2 guys, I would not recommend sending something with this large of a bow through the mail just in a regular envelope. You should probably put it in a padded mailer so that it can go through safe and sound. So that's all for today. Please do all the things that lets YouTube know you enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave me a comment down below. Thanks for joining me, and happy crafting.